good morning, and thank you for your opening statements. I suppose we're all very aware that we're in the middle of a climate emergency, and that significant action has to be taken to reduce our emissions and reach our national targets. And a lot of the things that are done may be well-intentioned, but they're obviously not sometimes cognizant of a significant proportion of our population who identify as disabled. And I hear from people on a regular basis about different decisions that are taken that impact on their lives, such as climate or cycle lanes, for example. We see in urban centres that the number of cycle lanes has increased and people are being encouraged to cycle or use e-scooters. But people who have a visual impairment or a hearing impairment find these very, very dangerous. They can't either see or maybe hear them coming, and they said that people are not always very nice about it when almost an impact occurs. I suppose as well we are encouraged to use public transport where that's possible, but for many disabled people that's not possible. Buses can only facilitate maybe one wheelchair user at a time. The gap between the platform and the train still exists in many cases, or the lift isn't working when you get to the train station, so disabled people can't access the platform in the first place. I suppose, Peter, you gave an example there of plastic straws and doing away with plastic straws. And OK, that's well-intentioned and required, but there isn't a viable alternative put in place. And I know myself, I don't use a straw on a regular basis, but if I take the kids to McDonald's and we have straws in our drinks, they're gone to mush by the time you can't get to the end of your drink. So, what's there at the moment is not working. And, it's quite concerning that they're not even biodegradable. I thought that they were, but they're not. So there's quite a few things there, and they're only a small handful of things. I suppose we have to look as well at disabled people are impacted by high costs more, so they're more more likely to be affected by poverty, and we see the introduction of carbon taxes. Now that affects, or people are encouraged to retrofit the houses, but that's very expensive to do, and unless you have money up front that you can avail of the matching grant, you're dependent on the Warmer Home Scheme, and there's a huge waiting list on that. It's 2.5-3 years. So there's a lot of things there that make sense and should happen, but they are impacting disabled people when they shouldn't be, and their views are not being taken into account. So I suppose my question for you, Robert, is you listed a number of organisations that you have consulted with, but the majority of those are not DPOs. So do you engage with DPOs on a regular basis? Because Article 4.3 of the UNCRPD stipulates that organisations and government departments and so on must engage with DPOs, which are disabled people's organisations, so they're disabled people representing themselves. And I suppose, are the needs of disabled people taken into consideration when developing policy? I suppose I will ask the IMI, have you been consulted with on different issues? Or are you aware of other DPOs that are? And is it meaningful consultation in that it's not just a box-ticking exercise? Because I've, again, spoken to people who are on different committees, maybe SPCs or councils and so on. They give their views in relation to maybe the parking bays or the outdoor dining areas that were introduced during COVID, which seemed like a great idea for some, but impacted disabled people again by ending up moving parking bays without any consultation to places that were not suitable at all. So are the recommendations actually taken on board? It needs to be meaningful consultation where we're listening to people and taking their points of view into account, because we know that COVID and we know the Ukrainian war and wars in other places impact on disabled people, and we much more than able-bodied people, and we need to ensure that we are prepared on how to respond to emergencies going forward.
Chair, thank you very much, Deputy, for the questions. I suppose in response to your first question, do you engage actively with DPOs? So in response to that, in 2022 was really the first year of the full implementation of the programme for the National Dialogue on Climate Action. We did reach out to a number of the organisations, as I mentioned, but we very much respect that wasn't as comprehensive and that there's a significant room for improvement in 2023. So we've learned a lot from our experience in 2022, and we will be reaching out to a much broader range of organisations across all populations we're identifying that are vulnerable to the transition to carbon neutrality, and that is quite a broad spectrum of organisations and peoples and stakeholders. So yes, we will very specifically be working with DPOs this year. What I can say is equally, as in my opening statement, we've moved from that focus group type model, which we got a certain amount from, to a more deliberative workshop style activity, and that we find that that's much more effective in engaging and understanding the key challenges that people are facing. The core purpose of that is in 23 we're going to be defining what key performance indicators for our delivery of the National Dialogue on Climate Action. That means engaging actively with people, but also understanding what are the key challenges people are facing and how those challenges differ by different populations. So that will allow us to say very comprehensively, here are the key challenges that we're facing, but people with disabilities are facing these disproportionately because. That evidence base then allows us to go back to the policymakers in the areas that you've mentioned and state these are the key challenges, these are the specific issues being faced by people with disabilities, and these are the asks of them as the policy leads. Just to say, in addition to that, and that really addresses, I think, your third point, that is it just consultation for the sake of consultation, or how effective are the insights or the asks of people, and are they being reflected in policy? So that's our core mechanism for ensuring that they are effective, delivered in policy. Now, that has been achieved in a number of different areas, not specifically to people with disabilities, but we have developed a very comprehensive programme last year, again, not as effective in this area as we would have liked, and that fed directly into the development of the Climate Action Plan 2023. So all our data, insights, etc., pulled together via the National Dialogue are analysed comprehensively and presented back to the policymakers in the development of the Climate Action Plan. And we're, again, improving on that process for 2023 and very much in this area.
Deputy, thanks for the question. I think we can all accept that the relevance and the awareness of statutory agencies and the political system around what a DPO is has increased substantially in the last couple of years, and credit to this committee for not only prioritising and highlighting the role of DPOs, and hopefully it's something that you will continue to do. Because it is a relatively new phenomenon in Ireland that you have these autonomous collective spaces led by disabled people. So it is credit to the department that they're recognising that there hasn't been that engagement but a commitment to do so. And that needs to be amplified not only at a national level to show that leadership in the climate action plans, but specifically at a local level as well. Because you asked, are people's representative, when they represent, are there suggestions taken on board? Are they recognised? By and large, not. And that's often because you've got very committed, and I want to recognise there's a number of disabled activists that are continually raising issues in relation to the danger of shared spaces, in relation to the removal of disabled parking bays, in the removal of disabled parking bays that now open into roads that pose a serious hazard to people with reduced mobility, to the movement of bus stops that make the assumption that the sole reason people use public transport is just to get to the city centre, the town centre quicker, that actually neglect that most people are using them to get to points around their community. They're systems that people use to navigate their society. So I think what we need to do is to amplify that voice, is that disabled people are beginning to self-organise locally and nationally. There are commitments at a statutory level under the CRPD to have and resource that and to recognise their involvement. But there's a real need for leadership at a national level, and this committee could be a driver for that. We all know that there is a lot of ad hoc development that's done at a local level that isn't guided by national policy. If we take something like the design manual for urban and rural streets, the DMURS, that is a document that guides how local authorities plan their spaces. That hasn't been reviewed since we've ratified CRPD. So there are huge parts of that aren't compliant with CRPD that need to be disability equality proofed. And that would be something that would be hugely advantageous, because we would go from the reliance on good people in local authorities that do see the value of engaging with DPOs and recognise that exchequer funds should be spent on spaces that are inclusive, versus the system that we have now that is very ad hoc, and often where systems are designed and then after the fact, when the design stage begins, disabled people are invited in to give their views, and then unfortunately, as you say, are often ignored. So I think it's to recognise the role of DPOs as an ongoing, authentic space that needs to be engaged with by policymakers, and that the leadership that's shown by the department, particularly in climate adaptation and mitigation strategies, to say, actually, if we're committing to these sustainable development goals, if you look at, there's a goal under sustainable cities and communities. One of those goals is around making human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. But we are in danger of creating around active travel and investing in public transport systems that aren't safe and aren't sustainable for many disabled people. So we need to get this right, because we can't have a system that, given the urgency of the demands around climate change, we invest in systems that we actually then need to replace in a very short space of time because they're not compliant with CRPD.
Just a quick example of something walking. We support local GPOs. So in Sligo, I'm supporting the Sligo GPO, and I was getting on a PPN. So through that, we got money to make 5 social media videos looking at the environmental barriers in terms of the sustainable climate change. So one of the videos is looking at the new recycling centres, and they're great, except they're all up on paths, and they're all blocked by curbs, and they're all quite high up, and they're all brand new. So we hope the PPN has given us money to make the videos, and the videos will be shown to the local authorities. So that's an example of where a dialogue process has actually working. Yeah.
Just to make sure as well that when I was saying about consultation, that it is accessible as well to ensure that, because sometimes it's not, or the ISL interpreters aren't provided, or there's different things, and that DPOs are not funded. So it's just to bear that in mind as well.
Thank you.